after the Manchester Arena bombing in 2017, 2018, it triggered my PTSD from Kosovo in 1999, which I said to you previously. I just compressed this, compartmentalised it down, and just threw myself into work. That was the catalyst that made me an above-average soldier. That trauma just was my driving force. Not drink, not drugs, not violence. I'm just going to throw myself into work and just ignore everything else. And then once I often describe myself as in the military, sort of like my uniform was my Iron Man costume. While I was in uniform, I would act, think, and respond differently than I would do without it. So it was like a superhero identity as such.
We're back returning to local government this week, and quite a special episode actually, because it's with an independent councillor, and independent politicians are relatively few and far between in our politics, as we know. So we're going to delve into all of that. But here today with former guardsman, Paul Watson. How are you, mate? How's it going?
Yeah, not too bad, Johnny. Doing really well. How are you, mate?
Yeah, I'm really good actually. Been really busy with the podcast, and it's always a delight for me to speak to fellow Afghanistan veterans. And we'll touch on that in your story. But when you popped up on social media, I was really interested in your wider work, your book, the work that you're doing with the Ex-Forces Union. But in particular, what really caught my eye was your ability, the fact that you've been elected as an independent councillor, because that's quite a rare feat. But before we get into all of that, as with all of our guests, it's nice to go back to the start and just really find out why on earth you joined the army in the first place. What were those motivations, perhaps the highs and lows of that time?
I think, to be honest, I grew up in the 80s, born in the 70s, grew up in the 80s, joined the army, went to careers office in 1995. Now, a lot of people who joined the infantry, I'm a former Irish Guardsman, are from adverse backgrounds with low education attainment. Now, that's the politician saying adverse background. What we mean is council estates with poor qualifications. So you go into careers office, you join the infantry. However, what that comes with is a unique set of skill sets because you've been exposed to potential domestic violence, whether that's physical abuse, mental abuse, in some cases, sexual abuse. And you've had your eyes open to criminality from an early age through growing up in these adverse backgrounds. So although you haven't got the academic qualifications at that time, doesn't mean you're not intelligent. It just means you haven't been pushed or driven to do well at school. But what you do have, you're fit, you're tough, you're resourceful, and you're streetwise. And that, as you know, as an Afghan vet, gives you that battlefield and spatial awareness on the battlefield. So some of these boys and girls who come from this background, they're some of the most intelligent soldiers, they're some of the most robust soldiers, and a lot of them go on to succeed in the military. So for me, it was escapism. I needed to get out of that background. The British Army gave me that platform to excel and to be accepted. And also coming from a broken home, like so many people from sort of the infantry in my background, it gave us a family, that camaraderie, that friendship, and where we fitted in. So I got to be a battalion. I found training in the 90s was very physical. It was demanding, but was fit, it was robust. Being slapped around a bit was nothing new to me. One of my good friends was 10 years older than me when we joined, and we formed a bond there, Niall. But we got to be battalion in 1996. Just turned 18 years old. Went on my first operational tour to South Armagh, Northern Ireland. Absolutely terrified because with nothing else going on apart from the Gulf and the Balkans, Northern Ireland, and the history there and the amount of soldiers we lost was absolutely frightening. And somebody coming from an Irish background, I didn't really get the politics. But that's a podcast for another day totally, because we can go into that all day. And then in 1999, we were part of the Irish Guards battle group who won the first people into Kosovo. And that really opened my eyes. And for me, the Balkans, in particular Kosovo, it's the unspoken war, and it's kind of like a stain on Europe because it's modern genocide. And it's 25 years, the anniversary next summer for this kind of liberation, call it, just so many clever words we use these days, the liberation of Kosovo. But some of the stuff that happened there laid the seeds of PTSD that lay dormant in me for almost 20 years. And it was a turning point for me in my sort of like military career, because at this point, for my first 3 years in the army, I was a rogue. I was going out, I was getting drunk, I was getting into trouble, I was due to sign off. But my coping mechanism at the time and the lack of mental health services for us who witnessed all these women, kids, mutilations, murders, rapes, the worst that humanity has to offer, that triggered something in me. And my coping mechanism wasn't drink, it wasn't drugs, it wasn't violence, it wasn't sex. It was knuckle down and work. So I started to progress through the ranks quite quickly. And then, 4 years later, the war in Iraq kicks off. I'm a section commander. I'm a land sergeant. I'm leading my men into battle. We were the first ones into Kosovo in 1999, and now we're attached to a great regiment, the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, Y Company Fusiliers, under company commander of a bloke called Paul Watson, who went on to be Lieutenant General, I believe. Top boy, really top bloke, really good commander. So we're at the forefront of that battle as well. And this is where sometimes what I like to call the darker sides of warfare come to life. The acceptable collateral damage of women, children, civilians. And I think sometimes when it comes to like the principles of warfare and how we conduct ourselves, we all join to be the good guy. We all want to help. We all want to do well in the world. And sometimes that's a prism and a bit naive of young men. And some of the situations we experienced over there laid the seeds for a lot of my men to suffer with mental health in the years that came, because we're at the forefront of that battle. But yet again, my coping mechanism, knuckle down, go back into work. And I kept excelling in the army, kept getting promoted. I was a sergeant, went back to Northern Ireland. We had a great tour this time round, because compared to the Kosovo tours and the Iraq war tour, going back to South Armagh in 2003, 2004, that winter, it was a breeze. And then I got promoted to be sergeant. I was then a platoon sergeant of our recce sniper platoon. And we were in Basra, the handover of Basra, which we've gone full circle from liberating Basra and then handed it back, arguably, to criminality with the Mahdi army. But I also, with that tour, I spent half that tour in Baghdad with the 10th Mountain Division, teaching them counterinsurgency operations and Northern Ireland patrol tactics, because there's a big cultural difference with armies, and the American structure is very much shock and awe. They've got loads of equipment, they've got loads of planes, loads of tanks, loads of Apache helicopters. We're like the poor cousin. So we've got to do foot patrols and everything's like on the cheap there, I say. So it was a really good experience working with them. And some of the guys were in the film Black Hawk Down, some of the 10th Mountain there. And trust me, they look nothing like the Hollywood counterparts, some of these boys, but it's a really good experience. And then I suppose on my final tour where we got injured was Afghanistan in 2010, 2011, where we got injured in a supply helicopter in Nadi Ali South, which dislodged a couple of discs in my back, which gave me nerve damage. But as an infantry soldier, and part of my job, and it's like, you always felt like a job's worth. One of my roles and responsibilities in that tour, when the boys are out on the ground getting blown up and shot, I was greeting them when they came back to Bastion for the times I was in Bastion. And I had to account for the rifle, the signals equipment, the ECM. So some bloke could have a gunshot wound to his leg and he wanted to go into the operating theatre to get it packed out. And I'm like, whoa, stop. Where's his rifle? Where's his ECM? Where's his radio? Because as we know, within 10 minutes of not having that equipment, we've got to send more people out to the ground and it gets IED'd. So for me to moan about a poorly back when some mates are coming in with double amputees, some these horrific injuries from IEDs over there, I just manned up, which then was detrimental to my long-term physical health. And because of that sort of like led the seed for me to be medically discharged in 2015. What was quite unique about that experience was the fact that I did a recruiting job, and then I became the battalion welfare officer as well. So I started to look at things from a different light. And a prime example is some of these boys and girls who got injured in Afghanistan, when they were coming through me, were leaving the army, whether it's 5, 10, 15, 20 years, I'd hand them a card for the Royal British Legion and say, thanks for your service. Now, if you need any help in the future, go to the charitable sector. And to this, even then at the time, that was the process. But looking back now, through the unproductive prism of your time, it doesn't sit with me. Does that make sense? Because, it wasn't the charities that sent us to war. It was the government. So this is where I suppose later on, if we want to talk about politics or anything, this is one of my motivational factors. why I got into politics, because I think the system is broken. Our society and the way we look at our military is fractured. And there's arguably between 2 and 2.5 million veterans in this country. And that's one powerful voice.
Oh, what can I say? Your story is literally the story of the British Armed Forces in the, latter half to the of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, quite frankly. And my tours bookended that, having left, and having had a medical that prevented me from regular service after uni. But I did Northern Ireland in 1998 in Belfast, and then I did Heriot 15 in 2011, 2012. But the bit in between is the bit where you were really busy. So I just take my hat off to you, literally, for what you did during that time. And you mentioned the thing at the start of that, you mentioned about the benefit, the immense power of our working class communities in soldiering. And I felt the benefit of that when I was in Belfast, because my corporal, and I've mentioned him a trillion times, I'm gonna have to try and find him, Andy Shaw. He was my mentor as a 18-year-old private soldier on the streets of West Belfast, from working class community in South London, and many people in the Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment. Those communities, we did recruit from London, and other working class communities in the southeast. Indeed, that's where my heritage is. My family, southeast London. And funny enough, Irish Docker heritage, as well. So that whole link to Northern Ireland, the politics of it all, I kind of had a bit of an idea around it. I was quite politically interested, but that mentorship, the ability to survive on the streetwise-ness, if that's what you want to call it. When I then got to Afghanistan at the age of 32, a lot of the foundations of soldiering I remembered, and there I am as an intelligence corps linguist on the ground, on patrol with the infantry. Funny enough, my old regiment was kicking about as well. I went back to those roots, and what that taught me. And yeah, there's so much in there. I think, but what you've also demonstrated is that how you have reflected on that and how you're starting to apply that in life post service. And that's led on to politics. And I'm really, as I said in the introduction, to stand and successfully get elected as an independent, is no mean feat. But what was the trigger moment that made you decide that enough was enough, and that you actually wanted to go for public office, put your head above the parapet, put your name out there on the ballot paper, and go for it? Was there a particular moment?
Yeah, I think there was. When I left the British Army in August 2015, I'd just undergone my third spinal operation in 3 years. So I couldn't do any resettlements. The only thing you can do is education. And there's a university close by, Salford University, and they do a political contemporary history degree. Um, I always regretted not excelled in the military, and it gave me a really good sort of like hard work ethic. So I managed to get myself onto a political contemporary history course at Salford University, which the British Army is going to pay for. So various different conversations. The universities are very, very left wing. It was just the rise of Trump and Make America Great Again. This was sort of like coming through, and nobody was speaking out, being conservative. So my wife was going over to New York for a 40. I said, please, please, go Trump Tower and get me an official Trump t-shirt. Just jumping a soldier in me to wind everyone up, because they're all like they're all left wing. So I got this Trump t-shirt on, and one of the lecturers was like, "You can't wear that." And I was like, "Why cannot wear this? It's offensive." I said, "Why is it offensive?" And so this started like more debates. But then at the same time, I was doing the injured soldiers network in Greater Manchester, where I'm from, and so many soldiers were disgruntled. So many veterans were like disillusioned with the service and the aftercare. And it kind of opened my eyes. And at the time, I was still a little bit naive and blindly loyal to the MOD. Like, I'm injured, they're going to look after me. But the trigger point was probably one of my friends, Chris Butcher, who was Royal Artillery, Iraq Afghan veteran, who's at university with me. And sadly, his demons got the better of him, and he died of a drug and alcohol overdose while at university. And this is kind of like a high profile former captain in the Royal Artillery. His life choices led to his heart to Joe give up on him. This is Terry Butcher's son, a former England footballer. So it was a big celebrity in the veterans world. And I remember going to his funeral, and the whole Royal Artillery were there. And I knew what had gone on, and I'm thinking, where was he guys when he needed him? And he'd had loads of mental health issues and was booted out. So I started campaigning on behalf of the veterans then. I started trying to raise their issues at local and national government. And to be fair, it's something that I call, arguably political tokenism. They'll come out every year at Remembrance, every politician, and they'll lay a wreath. That wreath to the British Legion is not for our veterans. And they'll get all the pictures taken with the veterans. And I started saying, well, what are I actually doing? What are your policies? How are you helping veterans? And why are you coming out to a charity? And why are you not taking accountability? Because if these politicians, and I say this as one myself, if they've got the nerve, the audacity to send our boys and girls to war, and you've got to remember the land fit for heroes promise after the First World War. This is a century ago, and it's consecutive governments. If you're going to send our boys and girls to war, then there's got to be the infrastructure and the provision to look after them on our return. And I know Johnny Mercer over the past couple of years, the biggest thing he's done is the Armed Forces Act 2021 and the Statutory Guidance 2022, getting that into law. And I know Op Fortitude, Op Courage, and Op Resolve, is it? There's three of them out at the moment. One for mental health, one for physical health, one for homelessness. But the autonomy and the powers of local government, these local boroughs should be they're empowered now by law not to disadvantage veterans. I'll give you a prime example. A veteran's wife contacted me from North Yorkshire early on in the year. My husband, ex-Tutu, was pulling his teeth out with pliers because he couldn't get a dental appointment for his local authority. So for me, if you're from London, you join the military at 16, you give up your access to NHS doctor, NHS dental service. The MOD take ownership of that. And you go back to wherever you're from in London, and you can't register with a doctor and you can't register with a GP, with a dental practice, which means your service to your country has put you at a disadvantage which is now deemed as illegal under law. So by being vocal about other veterans' issues, that's what got me interested in local politics. And of course, I was doing a political contemporary history degree, and I just loved the banter, just being disagreeable. Sometimes, even if you agreed with somebody, just for debate to hear other people's ideas and thought processes. I really enjoyed that aspect. But I was quite fortunate in my hometown of Atherton because it was already an established independent. And the year I was going to run in 2018, a fellow Royal Navy veteran was going to run as an independent. So I said, listen, I'm not going to stand in your way. There's no point two independents going for one seat because we're just going to split the vote with the two major parties. So we came to an agreement. He said, I'll run this year and you run next year. Fortunately, he got in. Then I got in the following year and I got re-elected this year as well. So we've got two veterans, a Royal Navy veteran and an Army veteran within the same ward, which is, I think, very unique in itself, and both independents at the same time.
I think one of the things I like about your approach is that you didn't just sort of sit there and, feel like being the victim. You actually took responsibility. So it's that difference between responsibility and entitlement. And I think you struck the balance well there, but you also empowered yourself. You got some education. Obviously, we get education through the military. We get education through the education of life at the sharp end, but we do get educated and trained through the military careers. But I also like the fact that you really applied yourself during that transition in terms of education that then led on to empower you to stand up and serve again ultimately in local government. I mean, what would your advice be to people that are looking at transitioning about how they can lean in more to that to empower themselves to go on and do better?
Well, I think we need more veterans in local government in terms of the wider veterans community because, I've got a slogan, for all veterans we served and will be heard. Now, the problem I think we've got as a veterans community as a whole, with the two major political parties. Don't get me wrong, I'm an independent. I think like Labour, I like some of them policies, but I don't conform to the ideology. Conservatives, well, I don't know where to go with them at the moment, but I like some of their policies, but I can't conform to that ideology. So I like sitting in the sort of common ground and being able to pick and choose. But what we need is, and I generally believe this, we need more veterans with that lived life experience to step forward. And as an independent, yes, it is harder because you don't have the big infrastructure of the big national parties. But local politics is about local people and local issues. And I think over the years, people forget they vote for the individual. We live in a representative democracy where they don't vote for you, they vote for you and sorry, not the political party. But I think it's gone upside down at the moment where the national narrative and the rhetoric is getting pushed down to local level, where it's grassroots issues that should be pushing the national rhetoric and the national policies. So I think we need, one of my favourite words in the military was always integrity, which is lost, I think, in modern national politics. And I think we need more servicemen who've got servicemen and women who've got that integrity, who are willing to serve the local communities, and then, like myself, can use that platform to help the wider veterans community as well. And the only downside is, I suppose, you've got to fund your own campaign. You don't have anybody, you can run a campaign as expenses or as cheap as you want. In the past, the campaigns that I've run over the past 3 or 4 years, because I help other people get elected as well, it generally costs about £500, which if you get elected, that's great. But if you don't, well, it's still a £500 learning experience.
On that, just picking up, you've alluded to the fact that through building relationships with another veteran, that conversation you had that of saying, look, you go this year, I'll be going next year. So that's another skill that we learn in the military about building relationships, negotiation, etc. So that's kind of the first step in order for your success. But I'll be really interested, and you alluded to it there, that the party machines come in, and I used to run elections for a political party and know the tools and the people, the army of volunteers we'd have to flood into areas and strategically win elections. And as I said earlier on, I'll take my hat off to you. How did you succeed as an independent? Were there any kind of both a strategy and some tactics that enabled you to win? Or was it the fact, was it the local angle? Was it the veterans angle? What were you messaging? How did you do it?
Well, I think it was 2018, or was it 2019? 2004, yeah, 2019 when I first got elected. And that was a big Brexit year. And nobody locally was speaking about Brexit. And I was just honest. I think A, I'm a veteran. B, I'm well known in my local community. Dare I say, mainly on a Friday and Saturday night. Yeah, 2 o'clock in the morning, they put me on in karaoke. The place empties like that. But people see me around. I'm from the area, which is my daughter goes to school here. My wife's a nurse here. I've got loads of friends here. So first of all, I'm known in the area. And like I say, a lot of Labour voters at the time were saying, when we especially doing a door knocking, which is very time intensive, and you've got to get a good team of family and friends to help you deliver your leaflets and so forth. I just honest with them, said, "How do you vote on Brexit?" And I said, "Well, I voted to leave the European Union." And they were like, "Well, we voted to stay." We'd have conversations, and they said, "But you're the first person who's been honest with us, because a lot of people in politics, they like to get the view of the voter first, and then try to angle it, dare I say, to their persuasion." Well, I was just blatantly honest, but and I think sometimes you've got two ears of one mouth, haven't you? A lot of listening, and like you were saying before, a lot of the national parties, you all agree with this yourself, their rhetoric comes from national politics and trying to shove it down the throat of local politics, and it's local issues. And I mean, one of the Labour slogans was vote Labour to save the NHS. And I was like, I can't save the NHS in local politics. That's national issues. But what I will do, I'll get your bins emptied for you. So there's two sort of like dimensions to this, and I was more from the campaign educating people between the difference between local, regional, and national politics, and how you can. Why I sum it up, we've got a few local football teams here: Everton Colours, Everton Town, and Everton Laburnum Rovers. You can support them, one of them, and then maybe support Manchester City, Liverpool, Arsenal. One's local, one's regional, But then when it comes to national level, you can support a different team. You can support England, you can support Ireland, you can support Scotland. So there's three different categories there. But unless you're interested in the subject, you don't necessarily know the difference between the three and say, I need to vote Conservative, local, regional, and national, or I need to vote Labour. And I think, to be fair, the way we've got a huge veterans community here as well. Where in Greater Manchester, there's a huge veterans community, but in the borough of Wigan, where I live, we've got the biggest veterans community within Greater Manchester as well. There's estimated over 20,000 veterans here. It's about 8% of the population because we've got a population of 320,000. So in terms of that demographic as well, being a veteran definitely helps. And I've always been raising and been vocal, like I'm very active in the veterans community as well. So that did me no harm either. But yeah, I think it's about knowing your environment, because what I found successful in Everton might not necessarily be successful in Newcastle or London, for example. So it's about knowing your community, being involved in your community, winning the trust of the local population, and doing what's best for the community.
Wow, some good advice there. Local, local, local. That was what I was used to say. But you're right. I think the national parties have strayed into too much of the national messaging, particularly post Brexit, into local campaigning. I was guilty of that when I used to run elections in local government, particularly when we were in opposition, because it was a gimme. But I think you were really clever there with that analogy. The football analogy is a really good one. I think anyone that's thinking about campaigning, even if you're campaigning trying to persuade people to vote differently locally than they do, and you're in a political party or an independent, I think if you're standing in local government, that's a really persuasive way. I think that the simplicity of that, how you presented that, is really quite powerful. I've never really thought of that. That's a great little thing. Great top tip there. And anyone
I'm
that
a
is
former
listening.
infantry, keep it simple, stupid, used to say.
Mate, I'm an infantry turned intelligence corps. That's a real dichotomy there, But yeah, so that's I honestly I love there's some strategy there, there's some tactics thrown in for good measure. But that's not all you're doing as well. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, you'll see there's a couple of banners behind Paul's desk, and one of which includes a book that you've written. We will put the links into the show notes as well for anyone that's interested. But what was that process like? What's the book about? And what was the process like of writing a book?
Well, after the Manchester Arena bombing in 2000, was it 2017, 2018? It triggered my PTSD from Kosovo in 1999, which I said to you previously. I just compressed this, compartmentalized it down, and just threw myself into work. That was the catalyst that made me an above average soldier. That trauma just was my driving force. Not drink, not drugs, not violence. I'm just going to throw myself into work and just ignore everything else. And then once I often describe myself as in the military, sort of like my uniform was my Iron Man costume. While I was in uniform, I would act, think, and respond differently than I would do without it. So it was like a superhero identity as such. So I was working with a lot of veterans, and the Manchester Arena bombing happened, and it put me in a bad place. And I didn't really engage with therapy the first time round. But throughout COVID and lockdown, we're all going a little bit stir crazy. And there's a few suicides of military veterans that I knew. And one of the guys who I was a CQMS in the Irish Guards, I didn't know this. When you're a private soldier or a guardsman and a colour sergeant, there's a big difference in social structure in an infantry battalion. So he was one of the guys that I knew. I weren't friends with him or anything like that, but I knew him. From a regimental association, if he needed any help, I'd always help him out. But that's as far as it went. We weren't drinking buddies. But something snapped in me because he had the same birthday as me. And it was out of the blue when he committed suicide. And like I said, my coping mechanism started off as work. So I just locked myself in this office here and I started ranting and writing letters to MPs, to everyone I could. And then 6 weeks later, I'd published this book. I just smashed it out over the space of 6 weeks. And I've never written a book before, typical infantry. I'm just going to commit to this and just do it. And it turned out that I didn't know that a book's supposed to be 80,000 words. This one turned out to be 125,000, but it's not your typical book. it addresses the mental health and the, the detrimental aspects of being a soldier and what needs to be done. It addresses the social economic issues that soldiers face. It addresses the behavioural learning and psychological conditions that we get put through in training. And it's really quite interesting when you look at this. And the best way to describe it, it's a biography, autobiography, and also go slightly academic because I use a post-revision, I use my history degree, and I use a post-revision analytical strategy to look at what we were doing at the time, how the guys who were interviewing thought and felt about it then, a few years later, and now. And it really is quite interesting, the different viewpoints. And then I bring in a political dimension as now. So you talk about Iraq, for example. Were we politically or military defeated in Iraq? We're politically defeated because the resolve of the British people decided that the British government or the British soldiers didn't want to see our soldiers getting killed anymore in Iraq. So we've lost the will of the British people in democracy. Once you lose the will of the British people, you've lost it politically. But that damaged our international relationship with the so-called special relationship with the US. So because they had to for example, they had to bring troops from Baghdad to Basra, which then put more pressure on the soldiers in Baghdad. So then in turn, we had to divert troops from Iraq into Afghanistan. And that's where all our SOPs and TTPs changed. And we became under the American war machine. That's when we lost the Helmand roadmap, the Helmand plan, all these British ideas for Helmand when we were holding ground. And I think General Templar, he always says in any counterinsurgency operation, the people are the prize, not land or defeating the other insurgents militarily. So I think saying it's 20% military action, 80% hearts and minds. When we start using 50 cals and GMGs and bunker buster weapons on compounds, we lost Afghanistan militarily because we used too much force when we should be focusing on the people and the prize. So I use all the skills that I've had over the years. I put it into this book. I interview a lot of people. I've upset a lot of people, but everything I cite, everything that I reference, like I say, it's slightly academic because everything has been referenced and cited. So if I'm calling out policy in terms of mental health, so for example, if I'm calling out TRIM, trauma risk management, how ineffective it is and how it's just another tool for the military to make it more combat effective and sustainable in combat. If I'm calling out post-operational stress management policies that aren't adhered to, because what infantry battalions are very good at and the British Army is very good at, to get you to deploy, you've got to do all your tick box exercises. But when you come back, your 1 month, your 3 month, your 6 month individual reviews, you've been to Afghanistan. Did you get a review of your welfare officer after 1 month, 3 months, and 6 months? You didn't, did you? So this is British Army policy that you should be going through. And when I got injured and we sent a company out to Afghan, and I know what it's like to be on the ground and fighting, and I'm trying to implement these, and the commanding officer said, we haven't got time for this. We haven't got time, just sign it off, sort of thing. So it's quite interesting from that aspect. But I also look at society's values and standards. I mean, I would argue that we're a militarized nation, and people say, no, we're not. If you look at any Greek story, any Roman story, there's always a hero's journey. If you look at biblical stories, any sort of Bible, any religious text, it's all about the unwilling hero who goes to war, comes back a general, he gets the respect of the people. Everybody wants the hero's journey. If you look at the cenotaph, the glorious dead, everyone comes out on a Remembrance Sunday and praises all the veterans. If you look at popular culture, if you look at computer games, if you look at cinema, if you look at water pistols, Nerf guns, right? We've got an unhealthy romantic association with warfare in this country, especially our generation. Dare I say, he wanted that hero's journey. He wanted that recognition. So for me, the majority of these people, if we recruit coming from broken homes, vulnerable backgrounds, yeah, it's almost like child exploitation to a certain degree, but especially when we could recruit them at 15 and 7 months back in the day, in the 90s. So we've got a duty as care as a society when they come out the other side, and especially if it takes 6 months through behavioural learning and conditioning methods to reprogram somebody for that short period of time, then when they leave the military, why is there no sort of de-escalation in this process? And a prime example, I was interviewing one of the guys who's in prison, a bloke called James Petrosky. probably worth a Google. But in a nutshell, he's the guy who robbed a couple of a rifle and an LSW in 2005 and went on a run in Birmingham, escaped police custody twice. I was a section commander in Iraq the previous year. Great soldier, should have been highly decorated, but I was a bit tight with putting out recommendations, maybe. So I was explaining to him and we having a few conversations about this, and he said, I was trained like a police attack dog. I said, okay, ears lit up. I went, explain. I was already studying the Skinnerian method at the time about behavioural psychology and how behavioural learning conditioning methods. And he goes to me, he said, right, a police attack dog. He goes, you can be there with his handler, you can stroke your dog officer. Yeah, you can stroke my dog. You're stroking a dog and it's fine. As soon as that police officer pulls that lead, dog's yap, 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 yap. He pulls it again, it's calm, and he can stroke it again. You think about the concept of bayonet fan to fight it. You're in the high support position, you can't. You've instructed shouts on guard. On guard! High port, calm. So I've come to the sort of like realization now, in the infantry especially, we put through all these intense sort of like training methods, behavioural learning conditioning methods. We're trained to switch on. If you think about how do I say, an advance to contact or an ambush drill, human evolution has taught us fight or flight. We hold our ground or we run away. Ambush drill, you turn left into the danger. Ambush left, turn left into danger, fight through. Advance to contact. The enemy over there, shooting and trying to kill you, we want you now to get up and walk towards them. Afghanistan, we know that's a Taliban-held village. We want you to go and take it. So when you think about how psychologically unhinged you are in the military through these behavioural learning conditioning methods, which are proven, and I talk about the evidence. This is all evidence-based in the book as well. There's a bloke called General Marshall, not the guy who did the Marshall Plan in the USA, but in the same sort of era. He came to the conclusion that only 20% of his GIs during the Second World War and the European Theatre War were shooting to kill. So he concluded then that this is, for productivity-wise, as an army, this isn't good enough. I'm not going to spoil anything, but by the time the Falklands came about, a British brigadier came to the conclusion that 20% from the Second World War had gone to 80, 90%. But as a combat fighting force, you want 100%. And this is where the concept of bayonet fighting then got introduced in the British Army. And then some of the nicest blokes in the world he interviewed for this book, butter won't melt. One of the guys joined the army for the wrong reasons. He cried when we got the news we're going to war in Iraq. He was a sports biller, did everything, boxing team, ski team, lived life in a tracksuit. Cried when we went to war. But when I asked him in an interview, how do you feel about close with engaged enemy? Not a thought, not a hesitation. He did it on command. So there's a lot of psychological damage there. Not just people who've been to war or close with engaged enemy, but everyone who's gone through that training regime to act, think, and feel differently. And it's almost like your identity stripped away from you. When you leave the military, you hand back in your superhero uniform, and it's like, I remember speaking to one guy who interviewed. He said, when I left the military after 24 years, high-ranking gentleman, and he said, veteran should say, and he said, I left my self-esteem with my military kit. So I think there's a lot to take in terms of that military journey. So that's basically what the book's about anyway.
Wow, what a summary. There's a lot to unpack there, and yeah, as I said, won't spoil it. If those are interested, do read the book. But you covered some pretty hard truths there, quite frankly, stuff that I not really have reflected on much in my life. But that's the nature of the beast, isn't it? That we send our young women away into harm's way, and that's how they're prepared. That's how we've been prepared. That is the hard truth. But the thing that you mentioned about purpose there, as well, and self-esteem, and you're finding that in different ways now. Obviously, I should imagine writing the book was a good outlet, and the work that you're doing in local government is an outlet as well, in a different way. That, as I say to people, stand up and serve again. You can't just take purpose-driven people and service and just park it and leave it with that kit, as you describe. There's got to be an outlet somewhere. It could be running a local football team, scout troop leader, becoming a magistrate, or for us, standing up and serving again in local government is a really good way. But the other work that you're doing is with the ex-forces union. Can you summarise what that is all about? Because that's going to be new to a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I formed the Ex-Forces Union last year, and our motto was quite simple: we served and we will be heard. There's between 2 and 2.5 million veterans in this country. And I think veterans in general, they don't trust either of the major political parties. For example, Tony Blair sent us to war illegally, then threw us on the scrap heap and said, that wasn't me who did that. We had bad intel from the British Army, and we got absolutely vilified when we came back from Iraq in 2003. I was at Wellington Barracks, London, and the hate was unbelievable. We had to have armed guards protecting our armed guards. It was that bad. Really funny story. I got some guardsmen up just before COVID, so 3 years ago, to do helping a public display in Everton. We've got a few MPs down. I'm not going to tell you what Tory MP it was, but these two guardsmen, they said, we've never met an MP before. They're in tunic and bearskin. He said, oh, good photo. I'll come and have a chat with him. The first thing one of them said, why are you going after our Northern Ireland veterans? I was like, I nearly spat my beer out, mate. I was like, oh, excuse me. What? Oh, this is going to get juicy. And he said to us, well, it was Theresa May's policy as Home Secretary, and she was still Prime Minister at the time. And he said she won't let it go. We keep telling her to let it go, but she won't. So in terms of the veterans community, I think we've been let down consecutively by every government since the First World War, where we promised a land fit for heroes. So there's 2.2, I always say, in between 2 and 2.5 million veterans in this country, but we're fractured. Right? And we don't have anybody lobbying or representing us or holding the national parties to account. So my goal is to represent at local level. I'm still learning my craft at the moment within the Greater Manchester area, trying to enforce the Armed Forces Act 2021, trying to inform the local authorities what they're legally bound to do, and try and get that spread throughout. Like a prime example is gym passes, right? You can be called up for service even though you've left the military up to the age of 55 in extreme situations like war. So as a civilian now, remember when you join the military and the first rule of government is protection of the realm, and this falls to the boys and girls of the armed forces, you give up some of their civil rights and liberties along the way. Even when you're a civilian or a veteran, you're still bound by the covenant where you can get called up for service. So what are you getting in return for that? There's been various documents given, like the NHS Veterans Aware Musculoskeletal Report 2021 and 2023, that highlight that soldiers are at a disadvantage, whether you're Army, Navy, RAF, and leave service, because you're 10 to 15% more likely to develop arthritis or musculoskeletal injuries later on in life because the burden and stress you put on your body. So are we getting a free gym pass for that? They expect us to be fit and healthy, to be called upon. And what about the injured soldiers like myself who've I've been paying £35 a month for the past 8 years to do rehabilitation. So I'm being punished financially when it's at the local authority. It's a local authority run gym. So for me, what are we getting as veterans in this country when we give so much? And especially when the arguably majority of the British Army and British Armed Forces are recruited from vulnerable backgrounds, which I say are getting exploited because they want that escapism. So there's a lot going on here to unwind, but essentially, we're not offering welfare as the Ex-Forces Union. We're not a trade union, but we are a union of like-minded people who want to improve the social and economic standing of our veterans community. And we can only do that together with one collected voice. So that's what I'm trying to do, just trying to use my sort of like political platform, trying to use my passion for veterans and to improve that. And I've made some good ground. I mean, Angela Rayner, I had a meeting with her in May. She's on board with this. And she was very honest. She said to me, she goes, it's not going to be a short-term fix, Paul. She says, but, I'm going to take on some of your ideas, going to push it forward. And she's putting a meeting forward with Rachel Hopkins, the MP for Luton, who's Johnny Mercer's counterpart. And I've had a few conversations with her already. So it's looking quite promising, but we're such politically we're divided as veterans. But one thing we're selfless. We're always trying to help each other out. We're coming together, but unified. That's 2 million votes. Generally, a household votes together. If you've got a partner, that's at least 4 million votes. So the question I always ask the major political parties: what are you doing for these 4 million votes, and how are you going to influence them 4 million votes? Because next year's election, mate, I'll tell you what, I couldn't call it, but if I was, I'd be betting on Labour.
Well, watch this space. We'll see. But it's good to see you've got that engagement. And yeah, Rachel Hopkins is a former guest of the show, friend of the show. So do look at her episode for those that are interested in what Labour had to say on the veterans side of things, as I interviewed her in Parliament. But you've got loads of energy, loads of passion. That's really clear, and I think clear to our listeners as well. So before we close out, what's next for you?
Well, what's next for me? That's a good one, really, isn't it? I'm just going to continue what I'm doing, mate. I'm passionate about veterans welfare, veterans aftercare. I think we need to start from scratch. I think too much emphasis has been put on the charitable sector for far too long, and that's our culture now. Veterans welfare is on the charitable sector. No, the accountability must stop with local and national government, and we've got to change this sort of this narrative that's a charitable sector. So I'll continue fighting for that. I'm writing another book at the moment called Conditioned to Kill, about the theory of behavioural learning conditioning, how it's evolved and how we implement that. And not for once am I saying our training methods are too hard, because the battlefield's an unforgiving place. I don't think they're hard enough. And I think they're going soft at the moment, if we're being fair, with all the PC brigade, because British military doesn't operate to society's values and standards. Okay, if we did that, we wouldn't win wars, wouldn't win battles. So for me, we've got to train a certain way to get the job done. But there's got to be better mental health and physical health support on return, especially if that mindfulness awareness of your mental state when you leave the services, regardless. So I'd like to see that improved a lot more. But like I say, John, it's just going to be more of the same, looking after my local residents and representing their needs, not political parties, and then looking after veterans and using my influence to help as many veterans as I can.
On that note, Councillor Paul Watson, thanks very much.
Cheers, Jenny. Have a good one.
Mate, that was mega. Thanks to our guests, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe now. Alternatively, you can support our mission by checking out in the show notes below, where you can rate, donate, or become our mate. Thank you.